Today, I'm going to take just a few minutes to tell you my backstory. Some of you may think you know parts of it. Some of you may not know anything. Some of you might be my relatives listening. You found the Very Cari Podcast. Grab yourself a cup of coffee and snuggle in while you and I chat about all things faith, wellness, and healing. Welcome to the Very Cari Podcast. I want to just take a second to tell you a little bit about myself. And I think learning about each other makes a huge difference on how we relate to each other. So I want to know your story as well. But my story starts in a very small town in Idaho. I was raised on a hobby farm ranch in Idaho. And this is back in the 70s and 80s. And we were expected, I'm the oldest of three girls, we were expected to work really hard. And that included milking the cows at a very young age, being responsible for feeding, being responsible for chores. There was no getting out of it. This is the days of party line telephones. If you don't know what that is, that's fine. If you do, you might need an eye cream. But it was a great way to to grow up in Idaho. I loved it. I loved growing up in church. My mom and dad were married for many, many years, all throughout my growing up. And again, I have two younger sisters. Now, I grew up thinking that I had great plans and purpose for my life. And back then, we didn't necessarily encourage girls to do non-traditional jobs. I would have loved to have gone to medical school, shoulda, coulda, woulda. That is absolutely what I would have done. But back in the day, it was, well, what about a teacher? Or what about a nurse? Or what about, something along that lines? Now, I do not blame my parents for that at all. That was the time. Those were the times we were living in. Girls we didn't encourage girls to go higher. And at that time, neither of my parents were college educated. So I was the first child coming through that came through with a college degree. I graduated high school and attended Lewis Clark State College in Lewiston, Idaho, where I got a communication arts degree. Okay. Great degree, not necessarily applicable to it. It's hard to find a job in real life with a communication arts degree, but I did it and worked for a little bit, decided after my two oldest were born to go back to nursing school. And it started because I got a job in McCall, Idaho, working for a doctor, and I loved it. And I thought, am I smart enough to go to nursing school? Now looking back, I think I should have said, go to medical school. But, back then we didn't know, just didn't know. So I jumped into nursing school, graduated in 3 years, same college that I went to for my communication arts degree, and loved nursing so much. Fell in love with the medical profession. A lot of people I talk to about the medical profession say, why'd you become a nurse? They talk about, I just want to love people, help people, heal people. And honestly, now this may make me unpopular, but that was never really my focus. It wasn't to help people, although helping people is very important to me. I loved the autonomy of nursing. I loved the science behind nursing. And those things prompted me to go into critical care medicine. And fast forward 20 years, I'm skipping past a bunch of stuff. I stayed in critical care in ICUs, did trauma, did some open heart nursing, loved ICU, loved the fast pace, loved getting to really affect a change and see things change with my patients in real time. Loved the science, loved the gadgetry, so to speak, of ICU. Absolutely loved it. Along the way, I had the opportunity to begin to teach new nurses. I have such a passion for the men and women that are coming into the profession. And so I obtained my master's degree in nursing education. What a great way to go. And have had the opportunity to teach and work all over these beautiful United States. And I've just met so many people and had so many great experiences as far as my career goes. Now, I did have 3 children. I have a Courtney, I have a Chase, and I have an Anne Marie. I had Anne Marie later in life. I have to laugh because they wrote on my chart advanced maternal age, which I thought was so ridiculous at the time. I could work circles around those other young whippersnappers in the ICU. And 3 amazing children. My husband is retired from the U.S. Army after 26 years of service. His last duty station was in Fort Knox, Kentucky. And the minute I got to Kentucky, I loved it here. Kentucky reminds me of Idaho 20 years ago. And I love the people. It's beautiful. It's green. It's just a great place to live. What a great place to live. So I live on an 80-acre farm in a tobacco barn that someone converted into a house many years ago. And we have goats and chickens and dogs and peacocks and geese. We have it all. I love my animals. Super important part of my life are my animals. And I also am currently working as an operating room nurse in a hospital right down the road here. So that is my backstory of my personal story. But let me take a second to tell you a little bit about my backstory with my relationship with God. A lot of you have reached out to me and said, Cari, tell us about where the faith component of the Very Cari podcast comes from. And let me tell you, I love me some Jesus. I do. I was raised in church. I was raised in church. I was raised to see people not only talking the talk, but walking the walk as far as their relationship with God went. Both of my parents, strong believers, my grandparents, strong believers, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, people that we hung out with, all loving Jesus and serving him on a regular basis. And it was inspirational to me. A lot of people have this conversion story about walking down that aisle, the Lord revealing himself to them, that salvation moment. And when I was younger, y'all listen, I felt so bad that I didn't have that salvation moment, that I didn't have that, oh, he touched me. Oh, he touched me, that I didn't have that. And I used to feel so badly about that. And one day I kind of felt like the Lord said to me, aren't you glad you don't have that? Not having that is a testimony in itself. Oh, not to say that I'm not a sinner saved by grace. I am absolutely. Not to say that I haven't made mistakes. I haven't screwed up. I've made bad choices. I've gotten off track 100%. But I have loved Jesus my whole life. I cannot think of a time when I did not love Jesus. Of course, my relationship has, waxed and waned over the years as far as my own personal choices, leading me farther away from God or closer to God. But never, never did the Lord pull back from me. He was always one step away. So about a year and a half ago, the Lord really started to wake me up. I felt like the Lord said to me, do better, be better, Cari. You know better. And a lot of us that were raised in church, and a lot of you might be able to relate with what I'm saying right now, we live and rest on the laurels of our parents' faith, our church's faith, our past experiences. And one of the reasons that I started the Very Cari podcast is I believe that the Lord is calling us all to a higher walk. What was okay 5 or 10 years ago is not okay. Just like when I was growing up in that farm in Idaho. What I did as a 10-year-old is not the expectation as a 12-year-old, etc. So as you grow up in the Lord and as things start to happen to you and more experiences, the Lord is calling us all higher. So that is how my background led me to where I am today. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. I hope it was exactly what you needed. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend and leave your ratings and reviews. I love hearing from you.